blocked, so the average man can't find it. Back in the older days, they would say, oh, it's they would do vinegar douches on females to try to get rid of the voices. They would do ECT and shock their brains. They would do all these horrible
things. The old Victorian cure for mania was to put people in a bath filled with ice,
Yes, bath full of ice. They'd hang them from their hands. So, but you could look at those treatments and see they didn't work.
No, it's a distraction. It's to distract.
Yeah, it's a distraction. So what the psychiatric mafia and Big Pharma have done is they moved this whole game away from where the average guy could take a look at the results. Now they come out with all these studies, with all this psychobabble and all these false statistics, and that the average guy can't understand. And they go, well, this is science. We know what's going on. The thing is, they don't know what's going on.
Evil entities that have got control of a person. But exorcism, as you stated last time, is a kind of a short-term cure, because these things can come back unless they're dealt with.
You need to know what they are. And like you were saying, this is a continuum. It's a part of the human condition. Schizophrenics are not non-human, as psychiatry treats them a lot of times, like guinea pigs. They're part of the human condition. So you get those thoughts, like you were talking about, that invade your brain, and all of a sudden you go, I wouldn't think that thought. That doesn't belong. I'd never act on anything like that. You're horrified you have the thought. That's them hitting you. And notice that you get upset when you have those thoughts, and that energy is drawn away. So with exorcism, it may drive them away, but it doesn't keep them away, because they seek the same frequency. So you can drive them away, but if you don't teach the patient what to do about them and how to move in a more positive spiritual direction to change their frequency out of that low frequency band, they're going to come right back.
Yes.
So back to this fellow. He said, I tried to kill myself 2 times. And I asked him, well, how'd you try to kill yourself, and what happened? He said, both times I tried to hang myself. One time I went out to the middle of the woods, about a mile from the nearest road, and hung the rope on a tree. There was no one around. I put the rope around my neck and it was hanging when a hunter appeared out of nowhere and cut me down. So this is something I've seen, especially in the ER, where something miraculous absolutely happens that interfered with a surefire suicide attempt. And one guy had a .357 Magnum with all the cylinders loaded. He put it to his head and it went click. He pointed it at the ground and went bang. Put it to his head, click, at the ground, bang. And he goes, okay, I got it. And he stopped shooting. One lady ran her car in front of a train. It hit the train, threw it into another track, and another oncoming train hit the car again and threw it like 50 yards off the road. They had to cut her out of that car. Everything had gone wrong in her life, and she was in that car. And I asked her in the ER, I said, what were you thinking when you regained consciousness and you saw you were still alive? She said, I was furious. I was absolutely furious. I didn't want to be here. And she said, then I heard a voice say, everything is going to be okay. And she said she felt this great feeling of peace. And here she was sitting in front of me in the ER, and all she had was like a little bit of a black eye. And that was it. That was it. And I'm like, she got hit by 2 trains and all she got was a black eye? And those things were so common back then that they were like lobsters used to be. They used to use them for dog food. I should have written these stories down. I only can remember a handful of the more dramatic ones. But there were so many interferences by something denied this person death. Hundreds of them, hundreds of cases like that, where just something miraculous happened that interfered with their killing themselves. One guy turned on the gas in his apartment. He was passing out when his sister miraculously showed up. He only came to visit him once every 6 months. Stuff like that.
Do you think that it's possible that the entities want to actually keep them alive ultimately, but they just want to put them through the horror and the trauma?
Well, I think it's both. And unless they actually take their spirit and once they're dead and take it over and become one of them, I never could figure out, because if they kill themselves, they cut off their food source.
Yes.
That guy is no longer providing them negative energy.
And when this is the interesting thing, I don't think we've ever brought this up, but if the person dies, is the demon or entity still attached to the departed person?
Yeah, maybe.
That is something, again, that is believed in by the Roman Catholic Church, because they got into some very dark areas with this when I was researching it. For instance, there are people, certain popes have got lead-lined coffins because they wanted to keep them in this dimension. This stuff is really believed by the priest class on this planet. So my question also is that I think that some people have these demons attached to them.
So I don't know. I don't know. It's either what you said, or they actually become one of these things and then are used against the human race further. These things hate the human race. They don't do anything good for the human race.
Well, parasites, aren't they? They're parasites energetically, so they need the energy anyway.
Right.
There was a great book that came out, Private Ritchie. It was a fella who died, and it was a famous book in the 50s about somebody who was in an RAF hospital in America, and he'd been drafted. And he got very ill in hospital, and he saw himself leaving his body, and he went around the whole hospital of this place and the whole complex, and he saw his comrades getting drunk in the bar, and he could see the spirits jumping into these men as they got drunker and drunker.
I've heard that over and over.
Yes. Yeah. So it does tie into things that cross over, but I think we should stick to the point here. But I think all this is kind of, it's very interesting and essential to have a little bit of exposition as to the broader picture of how this works, because it's not just something that happens to a person, it's something that can have repercussions which can go across a whole series of events.
It's like throwing a rock into a pond.
Yeah.
The disturbance spreads out and affects everybody in a negative way that is in contact with this person.
Yes.
You know,
So
and
it's
that
like a
generates more
virus.
negative
It's like
energy.
it's like what they call a virus. It's like a negativity virus
Yeah.
that just
Like
spreads out and affects everything. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
I've experienced that, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. One schizophrenic guy can tear up an entire family and anybody who comes in contact with them in a negative fashion.
Yeah.
So this guy hung him. He put a noose around the tree, and he said, I put a rope around my neck and I was hanging when a hunter appeared out of nowhere and cut me down. And I asked him, well, what did you think about the timing of that incident? And he said it was a miracle. And one of the common things that the voices tell these patients is that you're worthless, nobody loves you, you're a burden on everybody around you, your life is screwed up, you're stupid, you're ugly, you can't function. Just go ahead and kill yourself. Do it. Just do it. I mean, this is common for them to say. I've heard this from scores of schizophrenic patients that the voices were telling them to kill themselves. So I asked this fellow, did you make any other attempts? He said, yes. And I said, what happened? He said, I tried to hang myself in my garage. And what did you hang yourself with? A nylon rope. What happened? The rope broke twice. I said, what is it, a thick rope? He said, no, it's a regular rope, but it was old. I said, have you ever been sent to a psych hospital? He said, yes, twice. Are you hearing voices now? And sometimes, but the medicine keeps them down. The voices seem to want them dead, but they want to generate as much negative emotional energy as they can in the process. So it's real common for them to tell them, hang yourself, or you're worthless. So like I said, the suicide rate for schizophrenics is 3 to 5 times that of the normal population. But interesting enough, the suicide rate of psychiatrists is virtually exactly the same. It's like two sides of a coin.
Yes.
So I asked him, are you hearing voices now? And he says, sometimes, but the medicine keeps them down. So that's what these drugs do. They're major tranquilizers. They're phenothiazines for 10, 15 years after they were discovered by accident in one of the dye labs in Europe. They had no idea why they worked at all. So back in the 70s, one of the big drug companies who came out with an antidepressant said, well, we got a pill that, affects depression, and it affected it just a little bit more than random that they would find with a sugar pill. So they went, okay, it works better than the sugar pill. Not much better, but it works better. So it must be a chemical imbalance that we're dealing with. And so they made up this chemical imbalance myth, and they sold it to the entire population. And it's a complete lie. They've never found a chemical imbalance. And when I was working at the state hospital, I'd ask them, all the psychiatrists, what causes this? Oh, it's a chemical imbalance. But not once did I see them give any kind of lab work, any kind of clinical test, an EEG, EK, nothing. No test before they started prescribing their drugs that were supposed to be putting these guys back in balance mysteriously somehow. Once I investigated, I found out there are no tests for this chemical brain imbalance. There's no way to prove it. Matter of fact,
People repeat these things, Jerry. They repeat them as though they're real. I mean, a friend of mine, her brother was having some problems, and she said, well, it's just a chemical imbalance, but she could never define what it meant because it's a meaningless term. It doesn't mean anything. There's no objective kind of measurement for that. You can't measure it. It's very similar to what's going on at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. They have no idea what the chemical imbalance of the brain should be, even. There's 50 different chemicals in there. There's 50 different neurotransmitters and all. They have no idea what the balance should be. Yet they put out this lie. They teach it in the medical schools. It's passed from generation to generation to generation because they have to have a physical cause. If they don't have a physical cause, people are going to start asking, well, what is it you're treating? And they don't know. They have no idea what it is they're treating. They're just drugging down the brain. They're blaming everything on the brain. But when people who've died and come back, their bodies go dead, but they can still think.
Yes.
They're still thinking. So thought is not a physical process. It comes from the spirit. It comes from the energetic being that lives in there.
Yes.
But here they are saying, oh yeah, the brain is a thought. Nobody's ever found a thought in the brain. All the autopsies they've ever done, nobody's ever found a thought in the brain. It's another lie that they're putting out that helps them sell drugs. They don't care about curing people. They care about selling drugs and making a fortune. Matter of fact, they've cut the research funding for schizophrenia down to a dribble. They don't want a cure. They don't make money from a cure. They make money selling toxic drugs. And a lot of
Well, you could say the same about cancer research. I mean, the cancer rate is the highest it's ever been, and they've been allegedly researching it for over 100 years. So
they don't want to cure.
That's right.
The people who found cures either had their labs destroyed or mysteriously disappeared.
Yes.
Just like with the free energy guys. Anybody who got on the free energy, their labs were destroyed. They were threatened, and they didn't allow it to get out. No. So I went on to talk to the guy. I said, can you tell the difference between the voices and your own thoughts? And he said, yes. I said, well, who are they? He said, they're voices. I said, that the medications the psychiatrists give you weaken them? He said, yes. That is true. It usually weakens them, but it does not get rid of them. So it weakens them to different degrees and sometimes not much at all. So I asked him, are the voices still there? And he said, yes, they come as thoughts and not as voices outside. So I found that interesting is when the voices are really strong and they're no longer worried about the patient interfering with them, they will actually move outside the person's head, like 2-3 feet away, and talk to them from outside of their heads, like a separate entity, like a ghost. And that really freaks them out. It's like, then they know, okay, it's not me, this is something else, which they don't want. The voices don't want these people to understand that until they have pretty much control of them. So once they have control, they move outside a lot of times and speak to them from a point outside of their heads.
And this was relayed to you, wasn't it, by this subject?
Yeah, well, not just him, but several others.
Right, yeah.
I said, can you tell the difference between them and your own thoughts? Once they moved inside. So once he took the medications, they moved from outside to inside his head. And then I asked him, can you tell the difference between them and your own thoughts? And he said, yeah, but it's much more confusing. And that's one of the big traits of schizophrenia. They're really confused.
Yeah.
And it looks like they're not paying attention to what people are telling them because they're hearing other voices at the same time you're talking. So it's like they're distracted. So that explains a lot of the confusion that's part of the diagnosis. I said, what do they tell you when you're on your meds and they're not coming from outside of your head? He said, they tell me that people are out to get me and that those people want to hurt me. Again, we got the generation of negative emotional energy and negativity there. And when you're off your meds and you listen to what the voices are telling you to do, when you do follow through with what they're telling you and get in trouble for it, I asked, what do they do? How do they react? He said, they laugh at me. They tell me I'm stupid. And this is common. I've had 2 patients where the voices told them that if you gouge out one of your eyes, we'll leave and we won't come back. One of them did that. He gouged out one of his eyes and disfigured himself really bad. And I asked, well, what did the voices do after you did that? He said, they laughed at me, they mocked me, they said, how could you be so stupid as to do this? And they laughed at him and they mocked him. So here's this guy disfigured himself for life, and these things are doing this. The other guy, they just told him to do it, he didn't do it.
An interesting point you made, Jerry. When we were talking just before the show about one of these cases, which I think is relevant here to bring in now, was that one of the victims was bargaining with the voices for an allotted time where they could speak to him. He wasn't dictating that they could speak to him. He was trying to bargain with them, wasn't he, at a time where they could actually converse with him to leave him alone, right?
Yeah. They won't go for that. Yeah, they won't go for that. They don't want any restrictions.
No.
The only time they'll go for something like that is when we got them on the ropes, that we've disrupted the patterns enough to where they know they're losing ground. They're being starved out. The guy is no longer feeding them. He's using the That's a Lie program. He realizes that they are not who he is. There's a series of other things that they can do to fight back against the voices. But they have to realize that they're not them first. They have to realize that these things are not who they are. This is a separate entity with a separate mind. Try attacking the victim. Once they're on the ropes, then they start bargaining. We'll leave you alone. We'll only come a certain amount of time a day. Just don't get rid of us. And they start pleading and begging. You can't trust any bargain you make with them. None. Zero. They will not keep it. They have no ethics. They have no morals.
And the other side of the story is that example that we gave early on. You related this fellow who cured himself of the voices and got lonely and invited them back. And that must have been devastating for you after all that work.
I was in disbelief. I was in total disbelief. We worked for like 6 months, and back then I was still learning about these things. So we finally got rid of him. And I remember, I can see clearly how he reacted once they left. So he's sitting in his chair, and then he kind of gets disoriented and almost falls out of the chair. And I go, well, what's happening? He said, they left. They screamed as they left. They're gone. And he's sitting there looking with a stunned look on his face. And I said, what's going on? And he said, the silence is deafening. Because he'd been hearing them for 40 years. And all of a sudden, his mind is silent. So I
think this is a really good point, Jerry, because most people don't know what it's like not to have any thoughts. And as I said, because I worked on it for such a long time, it's not an uncommon thing. It's not difficult to do. But it takes vigilance to be able to realize the difference between your awareness and what's coming into it. So that is the way to recognize it as an invasion. And I kept trying to help this person that we both know to do that. But the will wasn't there to start with. And also the ability to even comprehend what I was talking about, because they were still working and being triggered by these basic negative emotions all the time.
So what it is a battle for the patient's attention. They
Yes.
want to control the attention. They won't allow the person to drive his own attention. They want to influence. So they steer that attention to negative stuff. They want them watching negative movies. They want them reading murder mysteries. They want them concentrating on negative aspects of they'll tell people constantly, they'll tell them negative things about themselves and everybody else around them. So they're trying to control that attention. So it's a battle for the patient's attention. That's where the struggle lies. It's because you are your attention. That's basically what you are. You focus your attention, and the mind takes a snapshot of what you're focusing your attention on. And what John Nash says, which is very interesting, is the mind isn't what we've been taught it is. It basically takes pictures. It'll take a picture of what you focus your attention on, and it's not the mind that analyzes that picture. It's the spirit of the individual. The mind's function is only to take a picture of what you look at. Wherever you put your attention, that picture comes into focus, and all the other pictures drop out. It's almost like a slideshow. Boom, boom, one picture after another. And as you switch your attention, other pictures drop out. So what Nash says is that during a trauma, your attention focuses down to yourself and burns kind of like a rut in your memory of that traumatic incident. If that doesn't feel good, so the individual tries to push that out of mind, and it goes into the subconscious and becomes an energy ridge that will be triggered by anybody with that same ridge, and it eats up your energy. So by pushing back against it,